Senator Kroger.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And may I firstly applaud the tone of Senator Marshall's address, given that Senator Wright before him commented and deliberated on the parlous state of the debate on this particular matter of public importance, which I thought was quite striking to make that observation during her own speech. But I will leave it there for others to make their own judgment on that. And I also would like to share one thing with the comments that Senator Marshall has just made, and that is that, without question, education is the key to unlock the potential of our young people for the future to come, for decades to come. There is no question. I think we would all support the fact that it is the key to unlocking the potential of our young. But what I do not support, and we've just heard perhaps probably for a good 3 or 4 minutes, where I fundamentally disagree with Senator Marshall and the government, is that you don't achieve that by throwing a bucket of money at it. You actually have to see an outcome for what you're doing and ensure that that money is invested wisely so that it does genuinely unlock the potential for our young. And can I say that since the current Prime Minister Gillard was the Education Minister under the former Prime Minister Rudd, she has not been particularly consistent in public policy in too many areas. But the one area I will commend her for, the one area that she has been consistent, has been her rhetoric, screaming, shouting, if you like, from the rafters about her commitment to education. But it is all rhetoric, it is all spin, and she has been consistent in it. And certainly the way in which she has continued to pursue this, and in fact, I quote, when she became Prime Minister, she referred to herself and assured the Australian public that she would be the Prime Minister of Education, and they were her words, Prime Minister of Education. But what extraordinary hubris, these meaningless words, but more tragically, the way in which she has continued to fail Australians' children and, may I say, our leaders of the future. Since 2007, she has been decrying the neglect of the education sector, the lack of appropriate resourcing, and all we have seen is a continued denigration of student standards across the board. And not surprisingly, what we have seen over probably more than 5 years now is an understanding and demonstration that the Labor government, as I said earlier on, has a total lack of understanding that the solution is not by throwing a bucket of money at something to come up with the right solution. It does have to be a clearly crafted framework to advance the education standards that we have here in Australia. And whilst the Prime Minister initially claimed, we all remember, that every child would have a computer. This was one of her claims when she was Education Minister. She claimed that every child, every student would have a computer on their desk. And then she massaged that message, and that was changed to every child from Year 9 on would have a computer on that desk. And what have we seen and heard in the last few months is that not only is that not the case, but there is no more money to ensure that every child does have a laptop on their desk. This is a consistency of approach that we are seeing time and time again, not just in education but in other areas. But I think it is incredibly tragic for those in the education area. And it's particularly the case because Senator Marshall, and as did Senator Mason before him, pointed out the $16.6 billion that was spent in building the school hall monuments to Prime Minister Gillard. And if there could not be, well, in my mind, there could not be a greater example of waste in terms of money that was invested in the education sector, and essentially the opportunity cost that has been lost by that being directed in that way instead of being spent in far more effective ways. And it's the auditor.
Order. Senator Kroger, just resume your seat. I remind senators on the right that Senator Kroger has the right to be heard in silence. Senator Kroger.
Thanks, Mr Acting Deputy President. I mean, the truth hurts. The facts of the matter is you only have to go to the Auditor-General's report on the Building the Education Revolution report. Read
Senator
that report.
Kroger, just resume your seat. Remind senators on the right that under Standing Order 197, senators will not be interrupted except on a matter of order or to call a quorum. Senator Kroger.
Thank you very much. As I said, the truth hurts. But you only have to go to that review, go to that independent audit that shows and it specifies that value for money was never a consideration there. Value for money was never a consideration. I also attended the reports and the inputting into that, and Senator Thorpe, you can try and change the facts as much as you like, but you just have to read the report.
Senator Kroger, you will address your remarks through the chair.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Last year, figures were released that showed, and I particularly raise this as a Victorian senator, that many schools, including government schools, would be worse off under the government's plan. In one of my patron seats in Deakin, there are no fewer than 8 schools that will be worse off. In Chisholm, there will be 15 schools that will lose money. And the government's repeated claims that no students would be worse off just don't hold water, Senator Collins. And as a Victorian senator, all Victorian senators
Senator
should
Kroger, you will resume your seat. Senator Collins, I remind you that under Standing Order 197, under Standing Order 197, senators have the right to be heard in silence, and they will not be interrupted except on a matter of order or to call attention to a quorum. Senator Kroger.
Chair, it's a tragedy when not all Victorian senators are looking after their constituents. The Catholic education sector in particular has valid concerns about the funding they will receive under the government's model and the likelihood that funding cuts will force an increase in school fees which parents simply cannot afford. And I quote, because clearly I'm one of the few Victorian senators that listens to principals in the state of Victoria. I quote the principal of Aquinas College in Ringwood, Mr Tony O'Byrne, who recently wrote to the parents of that school, and I very briefly will read out a chunk of what he has written, which is, it is important that politicians from all political parties understand the requirement that Catholic education continue to be funded at least at its current level, plus any indexation for rising costs. Parents will be well aware that currently Catholic schools operate on approximately 90% of the financial resources that are available to government schools, and it is clear in negotiations that the government is seeking to discount what might be available to Catholic schools.
Senator Thistlesway.
Thank you.